Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Creative Life with Kel Sweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today, we are getting into our book recommendation videos for the I Love Black Horror month, which I'm so excited. I'm so happy the month's finally started. I have already probably got started reading, got a head start. I'm so excited for y'all to see all the collaborations happening this month, and I'm hoping that we're really starting to talk a lot within the book club channels, the Patreons, the Discords, all these different places. I'm really excited, and I'm recording this before it starts. So I'm sitting here and I'm putting wishful thoughts out right now. So right now, I'm getting ready, but I cannot wait. And today we're talking about monster book recs, which is arguably one of the easier themes in my opinion, because it's a little bit open-ended and it's a little bit more or less specific than our other weeks. So I thought that it'd be a good way to start and kind of get the ball rolling on your book recommendations, to start with the monster book reads and recommendations that I have. So yeah, I hope you guys are doing good in your book challenge so far. I hope that I've already probably pushed through at least one book already, because I know my TBR was so long, but I just, yeah, it's all wishful thinking. But let's get into the intro and get into these book recs. I do have quite a few, all within a couple of subcategories of each other, so it should be a good video today. So like I said, monster theme kind of seems like the easiest theme and arguably my favorite theme, because it also includes monsters of men. So it includes slashers, it includes unhinged main characters. All of this is all encompassing, aside from just this is a possessed person, a actual monster, or anything along those lines. I really like this theme, and I like the idea of naming it the Monster Week and including all of those in there, because I like the idea of the changing idea of what a monster is. I think that that's really fun, and I think that it's really interesting. Now, it makes it a lot easier to choose during this week, but it also has made it a lot harder to have other weeks have their themes, because it's so open-ended. So something that's a possession story, where if it was a little bit more loose, maybe it could have been spirits or monster, or it could be witch, depending on who's the main character of the whole story. Is a possession because a witch did a curse, or is it an actual spirit inside the body, or is the person possessed by a demon? A demon's a monster. Are we counting it as a spirit? There's so many specifics, but the main thing that I love is that this week is kind of open-ended, so you can kind of get a good start and get your feet up under you before you get started. So, like I said, because there's so many different kind of variations of what monster could mean, I have 4 different categories for the recommendations I'm going to be giving you today. A majority of these I've read. Some of these I haven't. For the ones that I haven't, I will be kind of reading off what the description is for it, instead of giving my kind of TLDR, here's my version of the synopsis. But I can say that all of these are either on my TBR currently, or they're some of my top reads that I read last year. So I can very strongly give you a good portion of these recommendations. If you follow me on Instagram, I've given you portions of this list over there on Instagram, and hopefully you've come over here to get the rest of the list and get some more feedback and recommendations. I hope that those were already great and they've brought you over here. So let's get started with I love short scares. I've learned to really appreciate the short story and the novella. At the end of last year, I found myself giving out lower and lower reviews on the books I was reading, not because they were necessarily bad, but more so people need to understand that what sometimes makes a book really great is knowing when to cut your darlings. I've learned that I really do love a short story. And I think that that's because I read more short stories last year that really were impactful for me. One of those being The Wishing Pool and Other Stories by Tananarive Due, which is where we're going to start. I luckily got it as an ARC. Well, it wasn't even an ARC. It was more like an influencer release novel of some sort because it had already been out by Akashic Books. They asked if they could send it. I had tried to read To Not Reeve Do once before during the I Love Black Horror Challenge last year, and it was my soul to keep. And while I loved the idea and the plot of vampires in this very different way, I hated the main characters because it just felt like their relationship was so outdated. And the decisions that they were making were red flags all over the place. And I couldn't understand why they were basically putting themselves in this suffering situation when really it was just like a toxic relationship, let alone the horror. Like, was kind of like took a back seat because all this toxic stuff in the relationship was happening, which was hard because I was just like, I really want to love To Not Reeve Do. And I hadn't read the Reformatory just based off of what the content was. I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump into something that was historical trauma based. And also, I knew that she'd been writing for years. I didn't want to start with something that was brand new of hers. And then they told me, well, we want to send you this book. And I was like, I'm concerned. All right, we'll send it, but I don't know. And I'm going to be honest, based on the cover, I don't know if I would have picked it up. I'm a huge cover snob. And I pick up books sometimes based off the covers. I am so happy they sent that book. The novel is full of such amazing stories that, you know, I recently had the amazing opportunity to interview To Not Reeve Do and talk a bit about, one, where Black horror is, how she describes Black horror, but also how she writes about Black horror. And I loved her answer, which was, Black horror is simply horror that is written by a Black author and or includes Black characters. That is it. That's simply it. And I love that because truly that is it. Black horror does not need to be a re-examining or a reopening of Black trauma that is horrific. And there are so many other amazing sound bites and things that happened from that interview. Please go check out our newest issue of Night Terror magazine, which should be out by now, to go see that in full. But The Wishing Pool had so many stories that did not focus on Black trauma and still were so gripping and still felt so much like Black horror. One of the best stories that was in the novel, which I'm going to share that one. Because it's so many different stories are in here. I think that it's described using the incident at Bear Creek Lodge. That's one of the stories in here. And that's, I guess, one of the stories that they kind of latch on to describe what happens, like, in the book as a whole. 16 short stories in here. None of them are anything like each other. Except for the incident at Bear Creek Lodge, which has a part 1 and a part 2. Every other story in here, completely different from one another, which I loved, because the thing is that sometimes when authors get into writing their short story collections, you start to notice the train of thought was sticking with them throughout each and every story. Each one starts to feel a lot just like the other. And I never felt that once with The Wishing Pool whatsoever. The Wishing Pool itself is a story about reincarnation and weird things happening in nature regarding a daughter and her like sick father and everything. Another one in here had to do with a grandmother who may have a demon as a pet after years of trauma in the during the golden age of cinema and everything. Another one in here called Rumpus Room had to do with a possible serial killer situation. The one that really I absolutely love was called Caretaker. It's so creepy, and the way that it was written was so creepy. It felt like a silent horror film, like very Skinamarink type of thing, where it's just like, that's unsettling. And it has to do with a baby and their parents, unfortunately, like, coming to their end for very toxic reasons, and them being taken care of by a mysterious, possibly evil entity in the weeks afterwards, until somebody eventually found them. And it has to do with ants. I'm just remembering, like, what's happened. Like, It's so unsettling and it's amazing in its quietness, and it's very short. It's like 5 pages. I cannot recommend this book enough to you, especially to start off any of your monster reads, to get an idea of, well, what type of monsters do I even like, if that is a question you would be asking. This is an amazing collection of short stories for you to kind of taste test a lot of different monsters to see kind of what you're driven by. So that is my first recommendation for Monster Week. My next one, which is also a short story collection, is The Black Girl Survives in this one. This was another arc that was sent to me. It was actually my first arc ever that was sent to me. And again, it was sent to me because of how much the Black Horror Challenge had really kicked up. And I loved it. Again, another short story collection that none of them felt the same, and all of them felt like what it is to like make something that is Black horror and isn't just based on trauma. I loved it. There was a I'm looking for the book right now. I should have got them down like before I started. The story that really stood out to me and I absolutely love, which also, let's get into this cover. We love this cover. We love a great cover. The one that was a really, really great story for me was The Brides of Devil's Bayou by Desiree S. Evans, who was one of the editors for the book. It was really that feeling that I'm constantly looking for if I'm trying to find a witch book. And that's that dark feeling that The Craft gives you, where it's like, this is fun and very like womanly, but also very horrific and dark and goth and I love. And that is what The Devil's Bayou gave me. The main character is a Black woman. Her friend is there. She's kind of mourning her father's and her grandmother's like passing, and there's a lot of trauma and generational things that are happening within her family. I don't want to tell a lot because I do want you to go hear it for yourself, but the stories that are in here were absolutely amazing. None of them felt like the other. This actually got me into short story collections and anthologies because I had never really read any books like that before. And then I read this, it blew me away, and I was like, oh, I've got to read more. Like I want more tastings. It feels like a charcuterie board of different stories. And this book was just amazing. Of course, you already know that the Black girl survives in this one, but every single one of the stories, one was a sci-fi tale, a sci-fi horror type of thing. One was a creature feature type of thing. One and there was plenty of stories regarding what it means to be a Black girl and how much that can change from person to person. There were queer stories. There were stories that had to do with relationships. There were stories that had to do with generational trauma. There were so many things that were covered in this book and so many amazing, amazing stories. I think there was only one that was like a 3 for me. And that's still pretty high. So I cannot recommend enough for you to go check this out as well. I love kind of starting with these short stories because I feel like it gives you a possibility to kind of figure out, okay, what do I like in a monster story? What am I looking for in a monster story? And so I think that these are 2 really great books for you to try out if you're still trying to figure all that out. The last one that I have recommended for this short scares section is actually a novella instead of a short story collection, and that is Flowers for the Sea by Zen E. Rockland. So this is on my TBR. I've been meaning to read this for some time. We will see when I finally get a chance to read it because I don't think it's going to be this year considering my TBR, but this was another short story that I felt like was really great, and it has to do with a lot of more alien type of monster. So I'm going to read the synopsis for you. Flowers for the Sea is a dark, dazzling debut novella that reads like Rosemary's Baby by way of Octavia E. Butler. We are a people who do not forget. Survivors from a flooded kingdom struggle alone on an ark. Resources are scant and ravenous beasts circle. Their fangs are sharp. Among the refugees is Iraxi. Ostracized, despised, and a commoner who refused a prince, she's pregnant with a child that might be more than human. Her fate may be darker and more powerful than she can imagine. Zen E. Rockland's extraordinary debut is a lush, gothic fantasy about the prices we pay and the vengeance we seek. So, this is also purely like, you know, the fact that that even ended with this gothic fantasy. I think the conversation around what makes horror horror is one that's ever expanding. And for me, hearing that you're pregnant with a child that may be alien and you're in dire circumstances, I don't read that and I go, this is a fantasy. I read that and I go, oh, this seems like a little like light core horror. So I please keep that in mind as I give my recommendations throughout the rest of the month, that for me horror is a very flexible genre personally, and I think that the more that like you read it you kind of start to realize that. So I think that's on my TBR right now. I'm really excited to possibly, I don't know when I'm going to get around to reading it, but I really do want to get around to reading it. If you guys have read it before, please let me know down in the comments what you thought of it. If you did feel like it was more of a gothic fantasy. I think, again, genres are suggestions. They're always suggestions. I've read so many books that are like, that's literary fiction on the back of the cover. And then I read it and I'm like, no, you wrote a horror novel. Like, that's exactly what that is. I've read horror novels that were like, this could be considered a romance. Who knows? You know? Carmilla's apparently horror, but it's romance. It's just horror because of the vampires. Anyways, moving on to the next section is I Love Demons. And what I love about this one is that it's a much more clear, like, explanation of what a monster is. Like, when you're thinking, oh, of Monster Week, this is maybe more so akin to what you're thinking of. Starting with Jackal by Aaron E. Adams. I read this last year for the I Love Black Horror month, and I loved it. It deserved all the hype that it got. I hope that it has a resurgence of more people reading it this year. I loved what it had to say, and the synopsis tells you that it has to do with our main character who's gone back home. She lives in Appalachia, and how her town is, of course, which is racist adjacent. We'll say that they may not have the laws that may constitute racism, but there's an understanding amongst the community that still perpetuates it. And in this community, girls have been going missing for decades, and people don't seem to be very worried about it until one girl goes missing who has a white mother and is well known in the community, and things kind of make a turn for the south because whoever took that child messed up, because now people of course care considering the circumstances. Now, the way that this book ends, I was not expecting to be moved as much as I was, because of it felt like the explanation for what this book was basically all in the synopsis. Okay, got it. We're reading about a metaphor on child abductions, specifically for Black women, how they're the least like found, all of that. But the way that this story changes and what it really is at its core and how it ends and what you should be getting from the very ending of it is what blew me out the water with this book. I'm positive I gave it a 4.5 last year, and I stand beside that entirely now. I cannot recommend enough to go read this. It really is, really the ending is what is just mind-blowing about the message in this book. Another I Love Demons recommendation that I loved, it's a novella, and that is Ring Shout. I recommend this all the time because I love it. It's an amazing novel. One, let's get into the cover as per usual. This one was Henry Senni E. did this cover, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I've said it before, if you add any texture to some book, you make it like some matte type paper, uncoated, I'm gonna love it. I'm going to love the hardcover. It's going to feel so special. But this design is just so perfect. I honestly wanted this book. I had never even heard of it, and then I saw the cover while I was at, I think it was our trip to Portland like a couple years back, and I said, I don't know what it's about, but I want it. And then I ended up reading the synopsis for it, fell in love with the idea of it, and absolutely loved where it went. Ring Shout is about, it takes place during the turn of the century, and Birth of a Nation is about to come out. Three women who are Klux hunters. They're three black women, and Kluxes are essentially Ku Klux Klan looking monsters from another dimension, and they hunt them. Basically, these Kluxes are preying on the evil and hatred to tear a rip in the dimension in order for them to take over our dimension. And they're wanting the Birth of a Nation to essentially put enough hate out into our universe that they can rip this hole wide open, and they can come into our universe and take our world, and all of that. And our main character is essentially trying to stop that. The Cluxes are extremely scary for many different reasons, but you kind of find out what the screaming mouths on the front are about, and everything. And I think it was written really great. I think that this is a great example of how you can write a shorter novel and still write an extremely moving novel, still write a novel that, like, still write a story that still feels extremely well-rounded, and like, all of the, like, the world feels at larger. So absolutely recommend Ring Shout if you're looking for something that's shorter that is that monster trope. My last recommendation for the I love demons trope is I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jameson Shea. I think that everyone has heard about this book, and I think it's already got a sequel, but I've not read it yet. It's on my TBR. I will eventually read it, but essentially it's unhinged character possession type of stuff, and I'm going to read the synopsis to you because I've unfortunately not read it, so I can't give you my TLDR version of the synopsis. There will be blood. Ace of Spades meets House of Hollow in this villain origin story. Laurie Messney is a perfectionist with an axe to grind. Despite being constantly overlooked in the elite and cutthroat world of the Parisian ballet, she would do anything to prove that a black girl can take center stage. To the level playing field, Laurie ventures deep into the depths of the catacombs and strikes a deal with the pulsating river of blood, the primordial power Laurie gains, promises, influence, and adoration, everything she's dreamed of and worked toward. With retribution on her mind, she surpasses her bitter and privileged peers, leaving broken bodies behind her on her climb to stardom. But even as undeniable as she is, Laurie is not the only monster around, and her vicious desires make her a perfect target for slaughter. As she descends into madness and the mystifying world beneath her, she is faced with the ultimate choice: continue to break herself for scraps of validation, or succumb to the darkness that wants her exactly as she is, monstrous heart and all. That is, if the God Killer doesn't catch her first. From debut author Jameson Shea comes I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me, a slow burn horror that lifts a veil on the institutions that profit on exclusion and the toll of giving everything to a world that will never love you back. I can't believe that's a YA. Like, that's such an amazing plot for something that's considered YA. I will read it eventually. I truly will. It's on the ever growing list of books that I need to read, but I just have not gotten around to it. But I do recommend it because the plot sounds so amazing. Truly, truly amazing. The next section is I Love Real Life Nightmares. There will be 3 recommendations for this one, and again, 2 of them I've read, 1 of them is on my TBR. So first is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. Now you may be saying, Kelsey, that's a thriller. Yes, technically. If you read this novel, you would know this has a place in horror. It truly does, I feel like, have a place in horror. It is that dark, and the main character who is chasing the villain of it all, who he's chasing, is truly monstrous. It's monstrous in the way that if you love Silence of the Lambs and you think that Silence of the Lambs is a horror, then you think All of the Sinners Bleed is a horror as well. It arguably is just as dark, if not more so. Our main character is Titus, who is just become the first black sheriff in his hometown. He used to be in the FBI, but for one reason or another, he left and came back to his hometown. And basically, his first week or so on the job, there's a huge, like, one of the hugest issues to ever happen in the town happen at one of the schools, which opens up this ongoing puzzling mystery of darkness that is within every part of the town, and somehow everyone is involved in it one way or another, covering up the secret of like these murders that were happening to, again, children. This is a dark book, so I will say that if you have any issues with sexual abuse, if you have any regards to hearing about any like sort of racial violence, if you hear about any sort of issues with kids and abuse in any way regarding children, I do not really recommend the book for you, because that is the main thing and the of the entire novel. This is the heart of the entire thing. So, but I do recommend, if none of that is really a big thing for you, I do think that the book is extremely moving. I had my mom read this book. She became obsessed with S.A. Cosby, and honestly, it reignited her reading love. So I'll just tell you that it's a rough book, but it is an extremely good one. So I cannot recommend it enough. The next one that I would recommend, which also is a pretty hard read, is Model Home by River Solomon. Now, if you've been watching a lot of my videos, you know that I am a huge River Solomon fan now, after reading 2 of their books last year, Sorrowland, which is also on this list, right, as well as reading Model Home, which was their new release that came out at the end of last year in October. It's pitched as a haunted house story. So if you've not read it, you may be going, Kelsey, that should be like in our spirits recommendations. I don't want to tell you too much about what happens in the book, because you do need to read it and kind of put the pieces together yourself. But if you've read the book, you may understand clearly why it is in this I love real life nightmares category. And if you have not read it, read it, and then you'll kind of see why it's still here. It felt monster. Let's pull this out. Model Home, which again, we always got to give love to the cover. Jacket art and design was by Alex Murto. Amazing. Cannot say that enough. How amazing this is. The Maxwell family basically moved into this home in a gated community in the 90s. They lived there their entire lives, and there were horrible things that happened in that house, to the point where everybody said their house was haunted. They believed and fully believed that they lived in a haunted house because of how many horrible things were happening in the home that were unexplained or forgotten or whatever. Ezri is non-binary, and their 2 sisters, Eve and Emmanuel, are older and younger respectively. So they come home to their parents. Unfortunately, they've died, and it looks like it's a suicide and possibly a murder, like a suicide homicide situation. But also they know that this house that they grew up in was inherently extremely evil. There were just very horrible things that happened in this home. I don't want to give too much, but I think that this book is an amazing representation of what generational trauma and its secrets throughout the family, and a lack of pride, of not lack of pride, but so much pride can actually harm an entire family if not careful. And also a conversation in regards to when Black people try to integrate into spaces that inherently have always not had Black people in them, and what the challenges can be in those spaces where you're just inherently not wanted, and they can't, and what that can mean for an entire family who doesn't want to come to terms with that very clear truth. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. But once again, I have to say, the trauma in this book, Ezri as a character is extremely flawed. Extremely so. Like, self-worth is, there is a section in here regarding Ezri, and I cannot say enough that it was very, very hard for me to read, to hear somebody have just such low self-esteem, to allow somebody to do that, to be that depressive, to allow it. And you know, this is again talking about where trauma, if not realized and dealt with, what it can turn into as far as your depression is concerned. So cannot recommend it enough. Model Home by River Solomon. Real life nightmares in this one for sure. And last but not least is Nana by Brandon Massey. I have recommended this. It is on my TBR, but because I've not read it, I'm gonna have to read the synopsis to you. So this is the book description. Missing for her daughter's entire life, Grace now wants to be called Nana. And that's not all she wants. From award-winning suspense author Brandon Massey comes an explosive supernatural thriller of domestic drama and shocking secrets, guaranteed to keep you reading late into the night. Monica Stevens never knew her birth mother. Raised by a strict but loving adoptive parent, she blossomed into a woman with a thriving career as a pediatrician and a family of her own. But sometimes she wondered about her origins, especially her biological mother, until Grace arrives. Confessing to be the birth mother Monica had long wanted to meet, Grace quickly becomes an indispensable member of the Stevens household, cooking their meals, looking after the children, comforting Monica when the family dog is inexplicably killed, tending to Monica as she falls ill to a mysterious sickness that every day makes Monica look and feel older. Meanwhile, Grace is looking better, more vibrant, more youthful, more seductive. Monica's husband, Troy, knows something is up. He launches an investigation into the woman who demands to be called Nana and has taken over his home. But the truth is beyond their stay-up-all-night read for... it's beyond their wildest imaginings. It seems Grace has done this before. A stay-up-all-night read for fans of domestic thrillers and suspense novels. It's Body Snatcher. Body Snatcher, horror type of thing. 40-year... What is that called? Single white female type of thriller, it seems, and horror. Very excited to get to that. Brandon Massey is also up there with Tananarifu as like the pioneering Black horror and literature, was sitting there doing it when nobody else was doing it. So I do want to get to that, and Brandon Massey, I've not read any of his work yet, so I do want to get to that eventually. Please let me know down below again if you've read Nana, because I've been wanting to read it for some time now. I just have not found the time, and I keep on finding other books. So I do want to get to it eventually. Finally, I love science experiments gone wrong. I have 2 recommendations for this one, and one of them is on my TBR heavy, and the other one was one of my top 5 books and made me a huge believer in the author. The first one is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. I read Sorrowland last year during June to kind of read more about intersex and that conversation of, we just don't have a lot of characters, unfortunately, that are within intersex identify as such. So it's a very misunderstood identity and is sometimes lumped in with those who identify as trans, when the two aren't the same. And I've learned that from reading the novels here and there, but even then, unfortunately, there's still not a huge amount of intersex representation in novels. So we need to fix that. But I ended up reading Sorrowland, and it blew me away. It had horror, it had sci-fi, it had mystery, it had just weird literature, it had heartbreaking narratives, it had political narratives, it had romance, like heavy, hard romance. It had all of these things in it, and it had all of my favorite genres in it in the best way possible. And it tells this amazing story of Fern and how they grew up essentially in a Black cult. And that they escaped said cult and ended up having their 2 children out in the wild and raising them feral. And then because their cult ends up looking for them, they have to reassimilate their children into society in order to find protection. It was and what you don't find out is that Fern actually, there's a lot of things special about Fern, and that there was something very special about that cult as well. I think it was very interesting. I think when we think of the word cult, because of history and because of things like Waco, Texas, and things like that, or Jim Jones, we think of cults in this that's a white people thing. Cults. However, it's not, obviously, but I just think that a lot of history has only focused on cults that have only had white people in them more blatantly. Of course, there were all types of people at Waco, but it was clearly far more of a demographic of white people. And I loved that this cult was full of Black people, and only Black people, because it was based off of the idea that these people, after the Civil Rights Movement happened, their ancestors basically said, we can't change society, so we're going to make our own compound. We're just going to make our own. And in theory, you're like, that sounds great. Of course, we will make our own utopia. However, as we all know, that never works out. And unfortunately, somebody always wants to be in charge. Somebody always wants to hold the stick. And I think that it was a great exploration of what that is, how that's even possible, if that's possible, is another question. And I think that the ending went completely off the rails and was insane, but in a way that made sense. And I think that it built to that. And it was extremely, extremely interesting and just a fun book. Like, it was rough and there were many very heartbreaking things in it, but also it was just fun to read. So I cannot recommend that one enough to you as well. If you read it, you'll know what I mean by science experiments gone wrong, especially at the end of that novel. So I highly recommend it. And finally, which is, this is a huge one on my TBR, and that's Lakewood by Megan Giddings. I read Megan Giddings last year when I read The Women Can Fly, and it made me sob. That book made me sob. It is one of my top 5 books of all time now. It talks about so much that is so relatable and relevant to what we're going through right now as women. And the conversation of choice and who you are as women. I felt like I could completely identify with our main character entirely. She was a bisexual Black woman, and I loved the story. I loved even the conversation of what witches were, what were they concerned as, the future, this very parallel future to what we have. It was just really great. And that's her second book. Lakewood was her first book. And I still need to read it because I'm obsessed with Megan Giddings. And I've not read it yet. That at some point I get around to reading it. Again, I don't know, maybe I'll fit it in one of these months. I've got a whole physical TBR I've got to get through, so we'll see. But this is the synopsis. A startling debut about class and race, Lakewood evokes a terrifying world of medical experimentation, part The Handmaid's Tale, part The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. When Lena Johnson's beloved grandmother dies and the full extent of the family debt is revealed, the Black millennial drops out of college to support her family and takes a job in the mysterious and remote town of Lakewood, Michigan. On paper, her new job is too good to be true. High paying, no out-of-pocket medical expenses, a free place to live. All Lena has to do is participate in a secret program and lie to her friends and family about the research being done in Lakewood. An eye drop that makes brown eyes blue, a medication that could be a cure for dementia, golden pills promise to make all bad thoughts go away. The discoveries made in Lakewood, Lena is told, will change the world, but the consequences for the subjects involved could be devastating. As the truths of the program reveal themselves, Lena learns how much she's willing to sacrifice for the sake of her family. Provocative and thrilling, Lakewood is a breathtaking novel that takes an unflinching look at the moral dilemmas many working-class families face and the horror that has been forced on Black bodies in the name of science. Love it! I cannot wait to finally get around to reading this novel. Megan Giddings just knows how to write to me. I've read like her short stories. I read everything else that she's put out at this point. I'd read her grocery list if she published. And I just feel like, such an important topic. The way that she's going to write it sounds like it's going to be amazing. So I cannot wait to get to reading it. I know that some people have told me that in comparison to The Women Could Fly, it's a very different book, especially since it's her debut, so we will see. But I'm hoping that I get around to reading it this year. I just gotta find a place to fit it in. That is all of my monster recommendations. I know that it's a good amount of them. I think I've given you 11 book recommendations for the monster trope. So I know that you won't be able to fit them all in 1 week. That's the point. I really hope that you realize that I'm giving so many recommendations, not so that you have so much to, overwhelmed with picking to try and fit into this month, but rather your TBR grows so much that you can sprinkle them out throughout the rest of your year and making a really actual good effort to diversify yourself. Not simply just going, hey, I did it for Black History Month, but more so, wow, I really enjoyed that and that plot sounds amazing. I want to read that next month because I didn't have time to read it this month. So I hope that that's what you're feeling as you're getting some of these book recommendations and as you're hearing some of these books. Some of these books are some of my favorite top books of the last couple of years. They're all 5 stars, if not 4.5 stars. And the ones that are on my TBR, I am truly trying to find a way to fit them so that I can read them at some other point during this year. But we will see. Thank y'all so much for watching today's video. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. I hope that you are having a great month so far, a great reading month so far, and that you're participating in everything that we have going on. With this coming out during Monster Week, later on this week, I am hoping that I have already, maybe I'm making the announcement later on, but we're having our movie watching party later on this week. So please make sure that you're paying attention to either my Instagram or the Discord so that you don't miss voting for what we're going to be watching, as well as missing out on even when we're going to be watching it. I know it's going to probably be this weekend. Please stick around for that. Please subscribe if you're not already, if you liked any of the book recommendations today. There are far more coming throughout the month. But I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and I will talk to y'all in the next one. Bye!